everyone. So, for those who don't know, I'm Rebekah, and we are continuing our series on a part of the Bible that's a letter that was written to be publicly read, and it's called Ephesians because it was written to the Ephesians. Very creative titles in the Bible. And there's this particular part of it that is often referred to as the FiveFold gifts, or as the ministry gifts, or there's a few ways it's referred to. But basically, we are doing a series going through these, and it started a couple of weeks ago with Clyde, and continuing now, and it's going to continue through, and it's really exciting what we are going to dig in together. And also, I am so excited and inspired by how many of you already have taken the test, and the kind of results and feedback is so mixed. Some of you are like, yeah, that's what I am, and others are like, whoa, I don't think I'm that. And some of you are like, oh, that makes sense, I get it, while some of you are like, what? And so as we go through these weeks, we're going to open up why we get those sorts of reactions, why that matters to us, and why this whole passage matters to our lives and our relationship with God. And even for those of us who don't know Jesus yet, why this matters to all of us as people. So I'm going to read that passage to you. So Ephesians 4 from verse 11. Now these gifts Christ gave to the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. Now I'm going to pause here quickly just to say, this is one of our problems. This is where we get a little bit stuck. Through history, over time, we have become what is known as the established church. And because of that, we often see the church as the building, the place we come, the program that gets run when we're all together. And so we think if these gifts are for the building up of the church, we think, oh, so they're just for the people then who have an office upstairs in the church building. They're just for the people who have a contract or get paid or have an official title and role in what we call the church, this place, this gathering, this program, and whichever other churches we find ourselves in. But that's not actually the biblical perspective of the church. The biblical perspective of the church is that it's the people. It's history since Jesus' ascension, all the way to now, all through the future, until his return, well, actually, even after that, but that's a whole other subject, and globally. There is actually only one church. So when we say this church, that church, my church, your church, and all of this, we're actually local church communities, but that's a mouthful, but we're of one church. So these gifts are not only relevant to people with titles and positions and contracts and roles and jobs and callings in this context that we call church. Because in reality, when Ephesians 4:11, when the guy who wrote this, Paul, wrote this, he wasn't thinking of anything like this. He was thinking of the people of God being called out, filled with his Spirit, empowered to glorify him and bring hope to people in the workplace, in the home, in the supermarket, in the school, so to speak. He wasn't thinking of schools. But you get my drift. These gifts are relevant to all of us, not just that category of people. So, moving on. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Well, I don't think we're quite there yet. So this is still continuing. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced by people who try to trick us with lies so clever that they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of this body, the church. He makes the body fit together perfectly, and each part does its own special work. It helps others' parts to grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. I read a book a very long time ago. How many of you have heard of C.S. Lewis? Keep your hands up if you've heard of C.S. Lewis, and put your hands down if that's not because of the Narnia series. Most people have heard of C.S. Lewis because of the Narnia series, but he actually wrote a lot more. And I think part of his genius was that he was able to write something for children, but then he also wrote stuff that, oh my gosh, you've got to take a coffee break every sentence to figure out what that sentence meant, because it's so academic and intellectual. So very talented guy to write both ways like that. But he wrote this book called The Four Loves, and it's really one of those. It's some reading, I tell you. But in it, he talks about, because there's different types of love in the original language that the Bible's written in, and he talks about the four main ones. And one of them is friendship love. And he uses this illustration that has always stuck with me. I read this like 20 years ago, and this illustration has always stuck with me. He said there was a group of them that were friends. I don't know, some of you might have like seen some biopics like him and J.R.R. Tolkien, and there were some others, and they were friends in university, and their friendship was strong. They were this core, solid group, and one of them passed away. And he explains that in that one passing away, they didn't just lose that one. They lost pieces of each other. He says, we didn't just lose him, we lost what he brought out of that one, and what he shone on that one, and what he revealed in that one, and what he stirred up in that one. We didn't just lose that friend. We lost parts of who that friend made all of us. And I've always, that stayed with me. Well, the fivefold gifts, apostle, prophet, evangelist, teacher, pastor, those gifts are like that to who Jesus is. Each one is on its own, works with all the others to bring out Christ in us. And when we remove one, we don't just lose one. If we don't have an evangelist amongst us, we don't just lose what the evangelist brings, we lose what the evangelist brings out of the apostle and reveals in the prophet and stirs up in the pastor. And by the way, yeah, evangelists like to stir up pastors, but we'll get to that sort of thing later. We don't just lose the one that we don't have, we lose how that one influences all the others. Jesus is the epitome, the ultimate, the perfection of all five of these gifts. Now, you'll hear people call them gifts, graces, functions, offices. We'll call them gifts for ease now. But Jesus was the perfection of all five in perfect unity. And then we read in that passage that he gave some to be this part of him. And he gave some to be this part of him. And he gave some to be this part of him. That ensures that the only way we can actually see Christ in each other, the only way we can actually live and move and experience in the fullness of Christ is together. It means that in order to, those of us who know Jesus, we read passages about becoming like him, and we sing songs, and we're like, I want to know you, show me your heart, all of this. Well, the only way to truly seek all of Jesus, the only way to know a true picture of Jesus, the only way to become like Jesus is together. Ouch. Sometimes that sucks. Because sometimes we just want to be with people like us. Sometimes we just want to attract like. It's more comfortable. It's easier. But then we then cannot say we want to be like Jesus or we want to see the fullness of Jesus, because that's literally the way he has ordained it and fashioned it, that we will become like and see him. And these aren't merely, because I've said about we call them different things. When we say gifts, they're not just talents like I can sing or I can draw or I can run fast. They are core parts of how we tick. They are core ways that we think, perspectives that we have. So it's not just a case of saying, okay, well, Jesus wants to put a band together, so we need someone who can play guitar, someone who can play drums, and someone who can play keyboard, and then great, we've got all our pieces. That's not what this is. It's not just like putting together something that's going to function, so you need all these abilities. It's so much deeper and broader than that. It's that who we are in that gift is part of who Jesus is when it is functioning well. So it's how we think. So when we miss, say hypothetically again, the evangelist, we don't just lose somebody who has an ability and flair to evangelize. We miss somebody who ticks like an evangelist, somebody who thinks, somebody who goes to that thought before they go to that thought. Someone who asks those questions that the other four would never ask. And the same with all five. It's how we tick. It's how we see things. And so we all see it differently. And so it's not just that we become like him and see him by working together in some sort of functional sense. It's also that we see who he is as an identity when we are together in who we are as our identities, with these emphases of parts of him all coming together. Just an example there, because one thing that threw me when I did the test, I've done the test like so many times. I've been studying this topic for 12 years in depth, so I've taken this test from all the different platforms, all the different ways and what have you. And one thing that I came to learn was, because prophet's like kind of my second, along with something else, and I was like, what? I don't really have words of prophecy. I did when I was younger, but that's another thing. But what I came to learn was that in Corinthians, there's a list of gifts that are given to everyone, and one of them is the gift of prophecy, but that's different to the Ephesians 4:11 gift of prophet. So the gift of prophecy is something that you do. It flows out of you. It's where God gives you words for people, right? It gives you, tells you things that you wouldn't otherwise know. Well, words of knowledge. But anyway, we won't get into that. Whereas the Ephesians 4:11 gift of prophet is somebody who sees differently to people who aren't Ephesians 4:11 prophet. It's people who their head is in the future. They can read where something's going from where it is now. They see culture in a different way. So their gifts are not just abilities. They're not just things we do. They are not functions alone. They are part of who we are. Does that make sense? So if, say for example, if a tornado blew through this room right now, we get a lot of rain, but thank God we don't get tornadoes. But if a tornado ripped through this room, you would see people react differently in that moment, largely based on what their Ephesians 4:11 gifts are. And you would actually be able to see how, you could actually see, if you're looking for it, if you've studied it and you're looking for it, and I do this all the time, and I'll look at how people react to a situation or a problem or an emergency, and it's like, they're an apostle. Because their reaction is they're already thinking rebuild. They're already thinking, this is a chance to shape it up and make it better than it was before. Or, they're a pastor, because they're immediately checking who's injured, who's okay. They're thinking of the person who went through a tornado recently and lost everything, and they're like, this is re-traumatizing them. And so the way we respond, it actually reveals which gifts that we have. What would Jesus have looked like if he'd have been missing any one of those five? I mean, that is a question that we could all ponder and not conclude on for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. But just picture, say if Jesus wasn't a pastor. So he was an apostle, he was a sent one, he was innovative, he revolutionized, he was like, he had the apostle, he was a prophet, he saw the unseen, he knew the future, he knew where it was going, he could read the unseen. And he was an evangelist. He was reaching the lost. He was sharing the gospel, sharing the good news to anyone who could listen. And he was a teacher. He would open up the Old Testament scrolls and he would take them through it. But he wasn't a pastor. Wow. Imagine how differently he'd have responded when the children called out to him and people tried to shut the children up. Imagine how differently he'd have responded when the Pharisees manipulatively brought someone to his feet who they'd caught in something that they thought would trap him and should have her killed. Imagine how he'd have responded if the pastor wasn't there. Imagine how he would have responded when he's on that cross and the people who he created and who he's dying for are mocking him and ripping his clothes to gamble over. Imagine if the pastor wasn't there. Now, you can do that with all 5 of them, and it completely changes Jesus in a bad way. And yet we very often do that in our communities, in our friendship groups, in our workplaces, in our thoughts. We cut out the one that maybe clashes with us, or that we don't understand, or that we're not used to. And then that part of Jesus isn't there in us, in our experience, in our perception, in our lives. And what would each gift look like without the other 4? I mean, sadly, we if you study this and you become conscious of it, you see what certain gifts look like without the other gifts. Because it does happen. Because as humans, we like comfortable. We like familiar. We like our egos. We like people to agree with us and see things the way we see them. And so often we do witness what it looks like when one is missing. And all 4 are worse for it individually. If you take any one of those 5 away, it's not just, like I said, that you missed that one. It's that all the other 4 are a worse version of what they are for not having that one represented in the consciousness and in the experience and in the mission that we are on. We need all 5. Not just one of each as well, because this is the thing. Some people, they get hung up on the number 5, and they think, right, okay, so maybe I run a business, and I'm now thinking, how does that 5 look in my business? I have those 4, but I don't have that one, so I need to go out and get one of them ones, because then my business will run better unto the Lord. Or, right, so we've got this small group, and we all gather, and we all want to glorify God and bring hope to people, but let's see what we all are. Oh, that one's missing. We need to go get one of those. That's not how this works. Because none of us are just one. We are one and another, and then maybe that one, and we're all different, and what we are in the whole mix affects what kind of the main 1 or 2 we are, so we're all entirely unique. Also, when you add some other stuff to the bag, which we'll talk about in a moment, but you don't know, like apostles aren't all the same. Evangelists aren't all the same. An evangelist, so if I say the second one is the kind of the top one you are, so a pastoral evangelist is very different to an apostolic evangelist. So, a prophet pastor is very different to a teacher pastor. So it's not just a case of oh, okay, so 5, right? I need to go and be part of that 5. My friendship group, my small group, the thing God has called me to, the charity I'm going to start, my workplace and who I am to my colleagues. I need to get influence from the 5, right? It's not that simple. God has made us not just to like ritualistically count 5 and go, there we are, image of God. He's made it so that we are such a mix of all 5 that we don't just need 5. We just need each other. We need community because we're all going to see things differently. We're all going to spot something that the other ones didn't spot. And not just, even that prophet will spot something that prophet didn't spot. Because we're not just one and none of the others. We're a mix. And some people are one and then it goes whoop and the other 4. Some are like 1, 2, 3 really close together, which is me, and then a drop to 4 and then a drop to 5. Some are like 4 really high and 1 super low. We're all different. And that affects how all of us tick, how we think, how it all merges together. But not only do we become like Jesus when we work together, because all are needed to represent him, but also because working together is hard. You know, there are 2 ways the Bible tells us we can mature: suffering and Ephesians 4:11. And sometimes the 2 are the same. Sometimes Ephesians 4:11 is suffering because it's dying to the ego, it's dying to the carnal nature. Some of you in this room, you might have had a conflict with a person, like this year or recently. You might have talked about somebody and you and another person or a group of you have been like, that person just makes no sense. What planet are they on? They are so out of order. Like, they clearly have a bad heart. Their attitude stinks. Or they say this, but really they're that. And like, how could they possibly think this? Isn't it obvious that? Maybe now through this series you can start to realize there are different Ephesians 4:11 to you. And so while that's obvious to you and not them, something else is obvious to them that you're not seeing. And we need each other. But that stings our egos. But that's literally how we mature. Jesus, God, literally God, not like Muhammad, by the way. I think sometimes we've made Jesus like a secondary, like Muhammad. No, Jesus is God in flesh. And God came in flesh to our low level to become one of us as well as divine so that he could pay the price that is our debt. He could take the punishment for our crime so that he could stand on the dock in our place and save us for all eternity. And when we call on his name and we know he did that for us and we accept and we ask him to come into our lives and we give him our lives, he saves our souls. He saves us for eternity. He is the bridge between our lostness, our disorientation, our chaos, and God's perfection and peace and joy. He is the bridge. But how many of us know that while he is that bridge in eternity for us, that he is that bridge in our salvation of our soul, that we will live forever with him because of that? How many of us know that on earth today, in here, with this, we've got some catching up to do? That this ain't there yet. Our bodies get frail and break. Our minds get toxic and embarrassingly bad. Our hearts get dark and cynical or angry or self-defaming, whatever. The Bible tells us that the ways to catch our lived experience up with our eternal salvation is suffering and this. That makes it a pretty big deal, right? It's not just some passage redundantly in there for leaders. It is one of the 2 ways we mature. Do we stop hurting each other? We stop hurting ourselves. We stop blocking God from working in us and through us and for us. This is literally one of the two ways. That's how important it is. And it's not the clashing strengths. So sometimes what hurts the ego is the clashing strengths. Like, oh, they see what I don't see. But in reality, it's the clashing weaknesses. We're kind of okay with each other's different strengths, but each other's different weaknesses. And this is how we become like Christ, because apostles tend to have this specific set of weaknesses. Pastors tend to have this specific set of weaknesses. But when we all work together, it's the very clashing of those weaknesses that forces us to mature, that forces us to die to self, put the ego aside, and recognize. So somebody said to me recently, I can't remember who it was or even what it was about, but somebody said, they were annoyed that somebody had done something, and it was like, yeah, but in your past life, and this person was like, well, I never did that. As if that made it worse, but we all did something. But this is the attitude so many of us take on with this, is we go, I recognize you've got different strengths, that's great, let's work together. Oh, but your weakness, how could you do that? How could you be like? How could you treat people? How could you think? And that is where the growth is. When you set yourself to work with that person who you just think, what planet are they on? How can they even claim to love Jesus when they think like that, behave like that, act like that? It's working with those people, recognizing that their differences, that their weaknesses are different, and that God has actually called us to work with each other for that reason. Watch the maturity. Watch yourself grow up. It's incredible. It's amazing. So, quickly, I just want to go into a little bit of, what we want to do, a lot of teaching on this subject, especially when it's in, little half-hour sermons here and there, is it can really reduce it and oversimplify it. But while we all have these Ephesians 4:11 gifts, and we all need to work together because we all have these differences, meanwhile, human beings are complex beings. You are not only the gifts that showed up in your test. You are many other things. So for one thing, you have a personality and a temperament. And while sometimes stereotypically all evangelists seem, let's say, like extroverts, you get introverted evangelists. And while it might look as though all pastors can be like melancholic in the old Myers-Briggs and very like introspective, navel-gazy, definitely not all of them. There are a lot of pastors who are more feisty and driven. So we are not the stereotypes, but our temperaments and our gifts, they work together and they affect. And so you can have two people with the same gift, but completely different temperaments. So you're going to get a different nuance. Also, other biblical gifts. So I talked about the list in Corinthians that includes that's a different, so you've got the list in Corinthians that includes the gift of prophecy. Then you've got a different list in Corinthians that is different gifts that not everybody has the same of. And one of those is the gift of governance. So this is a big one with 4:11. Because we use the language of the pastor, it makes us think that apostle, prophet, teacher, evangelist, pastor, we think the pastor's the leader. That's not remotely what the Bible says. What the Bible says is the pastor can have the gift of governance as well from Corinthians, or the pastor could not have the gift of leadership, which is what that means, governance. When somebody's just got a natural ability to lead and people follow. But also that gift of leadership looks different in all those five. So an evangelist with the gift of governance, of leadership, that leadership looks more like gathering, galvanizing, inspiring. Whereas a teacher with the gift of governance looks more systematic, like how to get something from where it is to where it's going. And it might not feel quite so much like leadership, but it's the same ability. And so they look different in different ones. So some of us have this Ephesians 4:11, but We have the gift of hospitality with it, or we have the gift of healing and miracles with it, or we have the gift of leadership with it. By the way, if some of you read old versions of the Bible, it's called the gift of governance, it's often called the gift of administration, which I find very misleading, because I always thought that meant paperwork, but it doesn't. So we have all these mixers in it, and then you've got experiences. How many of you know that who we are is affected by what we experience? And that can change. So being affected by trauma can become all the stronger as we heal from the trauma, but we are affected by our experiences. So an apostle who has been traumatized in a local church context by something that happened is going to express themselves very differently to an apostle who hasn't had that trauma. A pastor who was brought up in a home where they were given a really strong toolkit and they were given a really good sense of self and really healthy discipline, lots of love, they're going to have a different expression of their pastor gift to someone who was brought up without love or without healthy discipline or in trauma. So we are such a mixed bag in all of this. Neurodiversity affects it so much. Like a teacher on the spectrum is going to have a different expression of their teaching to someone who's not on the spectrum. That diversity is part of the whole beauty, but also the whole thing is cyclic. So as much as that other thing about you affects your Ephesians 4:11, your Ephesians 4:11, your fivefold gift also affects that other thing about you. So it affects how we see things. This is how you can hear people. I really have a bugbear about this. Sorry if any of you have done this. It's not a personal thing. But I have a bugbear when siblings are used as a comparison and someone will tell this story and they'll say, oh, they both grew up with the same environment and the same experiences, but one of them is a drug addict with no home and no family and everybody's neglected them, while the other one is saving the world. It's like, no, you can't do that. We cannot compare people because they had the same experiences. Because we all interpret those experiences completely different. My sister and I've got more than one sister, but there's two of us very close in age. We had the same childhood. She's only 18 months younger than me. We both moved house a lot. Now, because of my temperament and my Ephesians 4:11 gifting, that made me itchy-footed. I get bored easily. It does Clyde's head in. I'll finish a house, and I'm like, right, I'm bored now. Let's move to a different house. He's like, we've only just got the house that we wanted. And it made me like, we're not moving again. I actually had to promise that with our recent move. I had to promise not again. But this recent move, we've got lots of projects that we can do because that's me. And so moving, it acclimatized me to the enjoyment of starting new things and having fresh beginnings and changing things, taking something. I love renovating a house, and I get bored once it's done. Whereas my sister, with completely different Ephesians 4:11 and temperament, it made her a total root setter. It made her never want to leave the place she was in when she was old enough to say, I'm not leaving. And so we cannot compare experiences and say, well, you've got better character because you came out of it well, and that person's got poor character. No. Because of our Ephesians 4:11 and other things, and so it's the same right now in your family, in that difficult parenting situation you've got, in your workplace, in your business, with your colleagues, with your friends. That thing that is happening, you will be interpreting differently. You will be coping with differently. You will be learning and growing from differently, or getting bitter, not better. It depends what we do. Than somebody with a different 4:11. That's why it's so important that we surround ourselves not just with the functions and abilities, but with the perspectives of all five. So what does that look like in your context? So let's say you're a single parent who's got an issue with one of your children right now and you feel stuck. Well, maybe you need to try and get yourself around some people with different fivefold giftings to you who are going to see that situation really differently. Because I can tell you now, an Ephesians 4:11 fivefold pastor is going to give you very different advice on how to handle that situation with your child to what an Ephesians 4:11 apostle is going to give you. And you need all five. This is why community is so important. One of the many reasons. But this is such a big reason why community is so important. Like, local church is where we find people nothing like us. And I encourage you, don't just stick to like. Don't just sit in the foyer drinking coffee with the people you already know, with the people who agree with everything you think and feel and say. Maybe it's a situation you've got at work. Like, whether you are working in a supermarket or a law firm or a high school or a local church building, whatever you're working in, you will mature into the image of Christ and you will perform God's mission in that place, in that context, if and when you work together. If and when you go and you surround yourself with people with the different giftings to the ones you've got. And you might feel stuck in a situation right now because you think, I'm out of options. I've tried this. But you're only trying things that you've thought of from your gifting. And you're praying and you're saying, Jesus, will you give me the answers? Because Jesus is perfect. He knows all things. But he has said, I've already given you her, him, them. Speak to those and you will see more of me. You will hear my voice. You will hear my perspective. And the brilliant thing is, those ego weaknesses of all those gifts that give us so many problems, they start to fade away the more that we work with people whose weaknesses make us just feel judgmental or irritated. Or if we can die to that, if we can put our ego down and go to the people who we think, why would I go to him? Have you seen the way he handles that? Well, maybe you could help him handle that, but he could help you handle this. So in your context right now, in your situations, in your problems, in your celebrations and the good things, what Ephesians 4:11s are you lacking? As much as we encourage you to look at your top gifts so that you can move in those, look at your bottom ones. Because there is what you're missing in your life. And most of us, unless we've already studied this and learned about it, most of us haven't even thought to go and reach out, to get alongside the people who have what we don't. The result, when we do that, and I'm not just talking going up to someone and saying, will you be my mentor? Like, not formal, but just go for a coffee with someone. Start a prayer group. Or just start a group and say, every month. And also, if it's with people in this building going through this series, that's great. You already know why each other are doing it. Like, it makes sense already. But you can obviously do it outside this building too. And it might be that you explain and you say, right, I've got this situation and, I listened to that word and it makes sense, so I'm going to do this. Or it might just be that you spot someone and you can see clearly and you just say, hey, could I take you for a coffee? And be as different as possible. Create friendship groups, prayer groups. Like, just spend time in the foyer with groups who are as different to you as possible. That is how we grow. The results, maturity. Gosh, if the Church of Jesus Christ in Britain was more mature, there'd be less in prisons, less on the streets, less everything bad. Christ-likeness, that's literally how we become like him. One of the best things about Jesus, I often think to myself, what made Jesus so good? But when I'm in a situation, I think, how would Jesus deal with this? I realize it's the fact that his ego was healthy. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't judgmental. It's just so healthy. We become more like that. And even when bad things happen to us and around us, the more like that we are, the more we grow and expand, and it's just everything's better. And the building up of the church. If you're here now and you're not part of the church in that way, you don't know Jesus, you haven't given your life to him, maybe in this meeting today, through the worship, through the baptisms, through something I've said, something Clyde said, something we sung, maybe you feel like you might have actually met him briefly. Maybe you feel like maybe you heard him speak. Maybe you saw him. If that's you, you are not just, if you choose to do something about that, you're not just doing it for you. You're not just getting some ticket to heaven. You are becoming part of this worldwide, historic and future mission and organism and body that you then get to be part of building. So I'm going to close with a prayer. But before I do, I want to give an opportunity for anyone in the room who wants to join that organism that, yes, makes mistakes, yes, has a bunch of ego, yes, has weaknesses, but that it gets better and stronger and more whole and more fruitful by being the community that we are. If you think to yourself, I want to step into that. I want to try. I want to explore. I want to see who Jesus really is. Then I don't normally do this, because I think when you're choosing Jesus, you make a bold declaration and like there's no shame in it. But today I feel like it's even just for people that are saying, yes, I'm curious. So for that reason, I'm going to ask everybody to close their eyes. Because this isn't necessarily for the people who are saying, I'm all in. I'm going to run to the front and declare to everybody. This is also for the people who are curious. So I'm going to count to 3. And if that's you, if you're curious or you're all in, I want you just to raise your hand. And we're just going to pray with you later. Just come to the front as people are leaving, and we're just going to pray for you. So after 3, if that's you, just raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. I'm going to give it like 4 more seconds. 4, that's a random number. If your heart is pounding and you're thinking, what's going on? Why do I feel this way? Just slip your hand up. People aren't watching. Holy God, I thank you. I thank you, Lord, that you are such a God of community and relationship, that you made us relate to you. You don't just save us from a distance, you call us into a relationship, and that you've made us depend on each other in order to grow, in order to see you, in order to become like you. And I pray, Lord, that this week, Holy Spirit, will you resonate to all of us in our hearts and minds, whichever point or word or whatever you spoke during today, will you just remind us of that? Will you refresh? Will you bring things back to us for your glory and for the hope of people? In your mighty name, Jesus Christ. Amen. And just to say, in fact, no, I won't. I'll let Clyde say about Wednesdays, because this Wednesday is super exciting, so I'm going to let him tell you about that.